In this tutorial, you'll learn how to write linear equations from a table. So the most important thing to know is that in order to write a linear equation in slope-intercept form, y equals mx plus b, you need to know two values. One is the rate of change, or the slope value, and the other is the y-intercept. Now let's start with the y-intercept because that can be the easiest one to find. So when you're given a table, the first thing you need to do is you need to check your x column and see if there's a 0 value there. So this is the x column, and this is a 0 value. Over here in this table, this is the x column, and that is a 0 value. These coordinate points are the y-intercepts. So if you can look for a 0 in the x column, then that number can tell you the y-intercept, or the b value. It's not always easy to find, but sometimes it can be easy to find. And you know it's easy to find if the x column has a 0 in it. Not the y column, just the x column. Finding the rate of change, or the slope, can be a little bit harder than finding an x-intercept. So when you find a slope or rate of change, you'll notice over here on the left-hand side that I've circled two pairs of points, and it doesn't matter which two that you choose. But you're going to use the slope formula, this should look familiar to you, to calculate that rate of change. So y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. So once you compute that math, you can find the number that goes in the end position. Now some students choose to use this slope formula, and some students just look at the math mentally. And they say, okay, the change in my y value was down 1, the change in this x value was up 1, so the delta y over the delta x is negative 1 over 1, also known as just a negative 1. The same thing can be done over here. This is going down 9, and this is going down 3. So the change in y is negative 9, and the change in x is negative 3. Let's go back to the other method. If you use the slope formula, you would get the same answer, negative 1 and 3. Now we're going to put it all together. The first thing we learned was that we can find the y-intercept just by looking at the table. The y-intercept is the y value when x is 0. After that, we took two random points, or we found the pattern of the y and the pattern of the x, and we found our slope. Once we know these two numbers, we put them in the appropriate places. And we did the same thing with this second table. We found our y-intercept by looking for the 0 value in the x column, right? That gave us our y-intercept, and then we calculated the rate of change by using 2 points. And we put those numbers into the y equals formula. Now sometimes the tables might be facing a different direction, like this. If the table is facing sideways, you still use the same technique. You find the x column and see if there's a 0 value. If there is, that's your y-intercept, or the number in the b position. So we can erase and replace our b value right here with our y-intercept, which is minus 7. And then we can erase and replace our m value with our slope once we calculate that math. I can use any 2 points I want, so maybe I'll use these two. So the change in y down here, the change in y is going up 1, and this change in x is going up 2. So the change in y over the change in x would be 1 over 2. And that means my equation would be y equals 1/2 x minus 7. Okay, let's try a few examples together. Equation number 1, or problem number 1. Do you see a 0 in the x column? Yes. Then you know your b value. Now we need to calculate our m value by finding the change in y and the change in x. So it looks like y is going up 4, and it looks like x is going up 1. So y is equal to 4 over 1x plus, what's that y-intercept again? 3. Now if you'd like, you could reduce this to just a 4. Let's take a look at the second one. Do you see that y-intercept? It's 30. Now we need to calculate the rate of change, which is the delta y over the delta x. The change in y is down 2, and the change in x is up 1. So that's negative 2 over 1. So our equation will be negative 2 over 1x, and our y-intercept is positive 30. Again, you can simplify this slope and take the denominator off if you'd like. Pause the video and give this one a try. Alright, let's see how you did. Were you able to find the y-intercept in the table? It's negative 2. Were you able to calculate the change in y over the change in x? So it looks like this one is going down 4, and this one is going up 1. So it's negative 4 over 1, also known as just negative 4. So y equals negative 4x, and the y-intercept is negative 2. And there's your equation. Alright, I think you're getting the hang of it. So let's try taking a look at something that's a little bit harder. Sometimes the y-intercept isn't in the table, and it can be hard to find, especially if there's no 0 value in the x column. So we don't know what the y-intercept is, we don't know what the b value is. So you have a couple of options. The first option is to see if you can work the pattern of the table backwards, to see if you can actually fill in a 0 in the x column. So let's take a look here. It looks as though this pattern is subtracting 3 each time. And it looks like this pattern is adding 1 each time. Now if I want my table to go backwards, I have to work my pattern backwards. So instead of subtracting 3 to move down the table, I can add 3 to move up the table. On the y side, I could add 3. But on the x side, I would subtract 1. So that would get me to 1 and 15. But I want to work my way back to 0. So maybe I do the pattern again. So if I add 3 on the y column, I would get 18. And if I subtract 1 on the x column, I'd get 0. So now I know that my b value is going to be 18. And I already figured out the pattern. The change in y over the change in x was negative 3 over 1, known as negative 3. So my equation is negative 3x plus 18. So this is a technique called work the pattern in reverse. So let's try these two problems here. I don't see a 0 in my x column, but I do know that if I extend this table, I could definitely get to a 0, because the pattern on the x's is to increase by 1, plus 1, plus 1, plus 1. So if I just continue plussing 1, I'd get to 0. Now let's take a look at the y pattern. Plus 2, plus 2, plus 2, and if I just plus 2 again, I would get that y-intercept. So my y-intercept is going to be 20. And my rate of change is the pattern I found in red and green. And 2 over 1 is 2. So my equation for that table is 2x plus 20. Now let's take a look over here. It looks like this is increasing by 5s. And it looks like this is increasing by 2s. But I don't want to extend the pattern that way. I want to go backwards with my pattern. So maybe instead of adding 5, I could subtract 5. And if I did that, I'd get that 0 that I want. Instead of adding 2, I could subtract 2, and I would get my y-intercept. So my y-intercept is going to be 1. And now, in order to get the slope number for this position, all I have to do is write my delta y over delta x pattern. Now be careful. The delta y is 2, and the delta x was 5. So my slope would be 5/2. And that is how you can write an equation from a table if you're able to find the y-intercept value.